February. Wind slides down empty streets and slips beneath doorways like a rumor, and a small town tries to keep its hands steady. They say the first body could have been an accident. The shopkeeper who never missed a sunrise found face down on his kitchen floor, the kettle screaming itself hoarse while the house filled with the sweet, metallic echo of silence. But the second body is harder to swallow, a traveler in a ditch with his pockets still full and his eyes fixed on nothing. And by the time the respected official disappears and later turns up in a stand of birches with neat marks carved into his skin like a language. Only the dead understand. People stop saying coincidence, they start saying prayer, and in that space between the two a new word grows legs: society, not the ordinary kind you see on market day, but the kind that wears a hood and a smile and shakes your hand while it measures your fear, because this isn't a story about a single blade or a single shadow, it's about a quiet machine built from loyalty, oaths, and a promise that power is safest in the dark, and if you're listening closely you can hear it hum beneath the floorboards of this town. Night after night the lock makers make money and the candle makers make more. Doors close early and windows grow eyes, neighbors nod without saying names, and everyone pretends they haven't noticed the pattern. No one will say out loud, each victim touched the same web: the shopkeeper who held debts for half the street, the traveler who carried letters he didn't read, the official who knew which budgets were real and which were theater, and somewhere in the quiet part of the map a group of people who never raise their voices pass a folded piece of paper around a table and tap once when they agree, tap twice when they disagree, and never speak the word murder because they prefer the word correction, a cleaner sound that leaves less smoke. The investigation begins like a candle in a cellar: one flame, one hand over it to keep the wind from telling secrets, two detectives who don't match on paper but rhyme in the right ways, one who has learned to listen to rooms and one who has learned to watch faces for the second truth that follows the first. They start with threads that look like dust, receipts that don't add up, a shoe print on a back step, a name that appears in 3 unrelated ledgers. And in a town this small patterns are a kind of confession, because when you draw lines between places no one thinks are connected and the lines meet in a circle, the circle is the thing you were supposed to pretend not to see. They speak to the widow at the shop with the trembling hands who tells them her husband started locking his office twice, once for thieves and once for friends, and to the boy who cleans the lamps on the courthouse steps who swears he saw robes under coats, not costumes, not the parade kind, the practical kind that fold away, and to the priest who will not say the word afraid but says it anyway by praying longer and louder than the book requires. And while the detectives do this work of collecting splinters, someone else does the same work in reverse, a hand resanding the places they have scratched, notes slipped beneath doors warning people to forget what they saw if they want their children to sleep through the night, telephones that ring once and then never again, and there's a taste the town begins to share like bad water, copper and faintly sweet, and they learn to drink it because thirst is worse. The bodies speak when they can, which is to say the bodies speak through what remains, cuts aligned with a compass that isn't there, ash in the lungs of a man who was found in snow, a simple band of twine tied to a wrist, always the same knot, always left-handed. The medical examiner calls it a signature and the detectives call it a door, because if someone signs their work it means they are not only killing, they're teaching. And if they are teaching then somewhere there's a teacher and a lesson plan and a class taking notes at a table where the light is low enough to make the brave look like cowards and the cowards look like saints. Whispers become a second weather system. You hear them in groceries and in church, the words code and chapter and dues floating above the produce like steam. A fisherman says he saw figures cross the marsh at 3 a.m. with no lanterns and no fear. A schoolteacher swears the chalk in her classroom writes symbols she didn't teach. And one night a woman wakes to the sound of footsteps on her roof and decides not to scream because she knows the scream is the invitation. The society thrives on invitations and it mailers them in midnight and guilt. And always there is a story tucked into the corner of each death, a reason that sounds tidy enough to fold into a newspaper. The shopkeeper's heart, the traveler's enemies, the official's stress, but the detectives keep their own list of reasons, the list that starts with debts and ends with silence, and between those two the names of people who share 3 small things: they stood in the way of a deal, they knew how to say no, and they didn't believe in ghosts until they met one with hands. There are meetings in rooms that were not meant for meetings, a cellar with lime on the walls and a table that smells like oil and old bread, a barn with a false floor where prints go in and don't come out, a house on a hill that no one ever sees in daylight, and in each room a speaker whose voice is never loud because loud is a kind of weakness, he or she. The detectives won't commit to pronouns while they are still counting. He says the town has lost its spine and we are the spine. That order doesn't bloom by itself, that sometimes you prune a tree to keep it from felling a house in the storm, and the people gathered nod because pruning is what good people do. The trick of a secret society is it never uses its real name, it calls itself maintenance, it calls itself mercy, and the oaths are framed as kindness. You will never be alone again, we will carry you if you stumble, we will close ranks if you are accused, and the cost of all that comfort is one favor, then another, then a blade in your hand while someone else points your wrist. The detectives press against a wall of friendlier faces that harden when the questions get close, and one of them, call him Hale because names are easier to carry than numbers. Hale believes the fastest way to a secret is through an obvious door, so he asks the sheriff for files older than the town's patients. He asks the treasurer for lists of donors who pretend to be shy. He asks the clergy for attendance records no one keeps unless they do. And in return someone sends Hale a photograph of his front steps taken at midnight, which is not a threat, it is a weather report. The sky is moving in, dress accordingly. And the other detective, call her Rowan because she leans like a tree in a storm and does not break. Rowan learns a different truth, that everyone who matters attends the same weddings and funerals and fundraisers, that alliances are made over chicken and wine and a handshake that never reaches the eyes. And at one of those gatherings she hears a toast that says everything and nothing to the work behind the work, and when the room laughs it laughs like a choir. It becomes a game of mirrors, who is watching whom, and the town is a house with too many hallways. The detectives chase a rumor about a meeting beneath the old library and find only dust and a ring of chairs. Someone was there and someone cleaned. And then a school custodian brings them a paper he found jammed behind a radiator. It is a list of initials beside dates, a simple calendar, and some dates have a small mark beside them, a sigil that looks like a hook and a halo, and when they check those dates against the murders the hook and halo appears like a watermark, not every time but often enough that the hair on the back of the neck learns how to stand. They widen the circle of the living, a bartender who sees more confessions than any priest, a clerk who knows which bills go to which hands, a mail carrier who can tell when a letter is heavy with money and when it is heavy with regret, and from those three they learn there is a house with shutters that never open, a house that receives more envelopes than any house its size, always at dusk, never at dawn, and if you stand across the street and pretend to tie your shoe you can count the men and women who arrive alone and leave together, 2 by 2, but never in threes, because threes make a conversation and twos make a pact. Inside that house, if the drawings they piece together are faithful, a long table, candles that burn without dripping, a book whose pages are thick enough to stop a small bullet, and on the wall a map of the town with pins in places that are not the bodies but the bottlenecks, the bridge, the power station, the sub-basement under the courthouse where cables sleep. The society does not worship death, it worships control. Death is a tool like any other, and if control can be kept by fear the way a shepherd keeps sheep with a dog, then the dog is fed nightly and praised in a language the sheep cannot speak. One late evening Hale and Rowan follow a tip to the cold edge of town where the marsh begins to swallow the road. They kill their lights and wait with windows down, the smell of brine and mud and old fires, and eventually three figures pass between the reeds without flashlights. They walk the way people walk when they know the ground better than their own kitchens. The detectives trail them at a distance to a building that used to be a canning warehouse and is now a skeleton with tin ribs, and inside, voices low, a ritual without spectacle. Pledge that tastes like iron, a phrase repeated 3 times and answered with 3 taps on the table, and then a voice the detectives both recognize without agreeing where from, a voice used to microphones, a voice that has told the town what is safe and what is not. That voice says, "We correct what cannot be corrected by law," and the room agrees the way a storm agrees with thunder. They don't move on the warehouse because there are 6 of them and 2 detectives and a wind that carries sound like a messenger boy with pockets full of coins. So Hale takes photographs and Rowan records audio that will sound later like a ghost reading minutes, and when the meeting breaks the figures file out and scatter like smart birds, never together, always alone, and for a week the detectives say nothing because saying something would be saying too soon. You get one shot at pulling a root without snapping it, and then the photographs disappear from evidence and the audio file returns blank, not erased, replaced, the length intact but the sound traded for a steady hum that makes your jaw ache. And the captain calls Hale into an office and says he must be mistaken, that the photographs do not exist because they never existed, and just like that the case teaches its clearest lesson, the society is not outside the house, it is inside the plumbing. The pressure tightens. Rowan's car is followed by a sedan that is always a different color and always the same driver. Hale's mailbox holds a dead bird one morning and a live note the next. Next time the bird will be you. The handwriting careful like a schoolteacher's. They file reports and receive sympathy without teeth. Friends stop mentioning dinner and start mentioning caution. And then, as if to underline the syllabus, another body. This one staged across a church threshold with the same left-handed knot at the wrist and a paper tucked beneath the tongue. A paper that carries a single line: we keep order when others will not. The town begins to choose sides without admitting it. People who used to argue about weather now argue about whether fear is a reasonable tax, whether the price of sleeping through the night is letting a few men and women decide which lives are too expensive to keep. And at a council meeting where the agenda is potholes but the conversation is blood, an older man stands and says, "There are wolves here and there have always been wolves," and a woman stands and says, "Yes, but the wolves are wearing our faces," and the room splits like dry wood, half the crowd clapping because they are tired and half because they are awake. Hale finds a seam where the wall doesn't meet the floor in a storage room beneath the courthouse, a seam just wide enough to slide a knife tip into, and behind it a narrow space that smells like mildew and ink, a hiding place for a box that should have been burned but wasn't. Inside, a ledger bound in black cloth and pinned closed with 2 brass studs, a ring of keys with numbers stamped into their heads, and a photograph of 12 people taken from behind, all of them in coats plain enough to pass unnoticed. But in the corner of the photograph a reflection in a glass case catches half a face, a mouth you could identify by the set of its line, a jaw you've seen on campaign posters and in hospital newsletters and in the frame over the mantel of a house that hosts fundraisers for libraries. And while Hale stares at that half face and hears his pulse in his ears, Rowan studies the ledger and realizes the entries are not names but transactions of another kind, not money, not exactly favors, each line a promise fulfilled, each promise repaid with silence, and in the margin a mark that looks like a hook and halo, and next to that mark a date they have not reached yet, a date 3 nights from now, a location written in a shorthand they should not know but do, because the town taught them its shorthand the way a mother teaches a lullaby, without meaning to. They make a plan in a whisper and a map with their fingers on a diner tabletop, coffee going cold while the waitress pretends not to hear words the walls will repeat later. They will go without a warrant because warrants float. They will bring one person they trust who will not turn around and call someone else. They will enter through a door that is not a door, an alley that connects to a service staircase that connects to a mezzanine that used to be a balcony when the building was a theater for plays no one could afford, and they will listen, gather, record, and this time they will guard the evidence with knives and teeth and the kind of stubborn that can crack bone. 3 nights later the sky is a lid and the town is ajar. The building is a municipal hall that smells like cleaner and old arguments. The mezzanine is dark enough to swallow men whole, and beneath them the room fills slowly with people who look like anyone, because that is the point. Anonymity is camouflage and camouflage is ethics. We are not monsters, we are your neighbors who do what must be done. And the voice that belongs to the half-face in the photograph begins to speak, not confessing. Never confessing, simply explaining the world in a way that makes murder sound like maintenance. We remove what corrodes the whole, he says. We cauterize, he says. We keep this town from becoming a headline. And there's a murmur of approval that sounds like purring. Rowan raises the small recorder to catch every syllable and Hale keeps his eyes on the doors, counting exits like a prayer bead, and for several minutes the room delivers exactly what they came to steal: strategy, assignment, threat, reward, the architecture of a machine. But then the speaker pauses and turns his head just enough that the profile becomes whole, the jaw from the photograph now attached to a smile, and he says, "We have a leak." And the room holds its breath. Not in this hall. He continues, in the idea of the hall, and he lifts a hand and the door behind the mezzanine opens silently, not below, behind, the kind of door you don't notice until it notices you, and a figure steps into the darkness at their backs and says, soft as moth wings, "Detective Rowan." "Detective Hale. You left your car 2 blocks away to be polite. Thank you." The figure does not move closer, not yet, and the voice below does not rise. It doesn't need to. "You came because you believe in law," the speaker says. We applaud that, and in the same breath, like 2 notes on one bow, law is a house. We are the foundation, and Hale understands that the plan has already been moved 2 squares ahead by a hand they cannot see, and Rowan's hand finds his sleeve, the small squeeze that means we are not done but we are not staying, and the figure behind them says, "There is a ledger you borrowed, there is a key ring you misplaced, There is a photograph you think you have hidden in a safe deposit box registered in your mother's maiden name, and the way she says it, because now they hear it clearly, the figure behind them is a woman, tells them the safe deposit box is already empty. The room below begins to sing, not a song, a note, low and steady, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth, and the woman in the doorway steps aside as if granting permission. You can go, she says, for now, and Hale wonders out loud, just once, why let us, and the answer floats up like dust, because the story needs you to keep telling it until the end, and when they back through the door into a hallway that smells like paste and paint, the woman does not follow, she simply watches, and there is no triumph in her face, only the calm of someone who believes the future is already written. Outside, the town looks almost kind under the sodium lamps. You could forget the hum beneath the sidewalks if you tried hard enough, and they don't run because running is an admission and admission is a kind of signature. They walk to their car and find a single envelope under the wiper, inside a photograph of the two of them on the mezzanine 15 minutes ago, taken from an angle that requires a camera the building does not own. On the back a date circled in red, the same date from the ledger. And beneath it 3 words, come see how. They sit in the car without starting it, windows fogging, a metronome of breath. The engine finally turns and the radio wakes to a station that no longer exists but somehow plays a voice they both recognize, the speaker from the hall delivering weather, clouds moving in, he says, low visibility, and it would be easy to laugh if it weren't so accurate, and Rowan, who does not make promises carelessly, says, part 2, and Hale says, we're not dead yet, and in the rearview mirror the municipal hall is just a building, brick and glass and lights you can switch off, but the shadow that detaches from its wall and crosses the street toward them is not a trick of the eye, it is a person with purpose, and the last thing you hear before we cut to black is the soft tap of a knuckle on the car window and the whisper you will learn to fear. The knuckle taps the glass once like a metronome and Hale lowers the window 2 inches because fear is a door you cannot open all the way. The woman from the mezzanine leans toward the gap and the rain makes commas in her hair. You wanted proof, she says, you'll have it on the date you were invited, and her smile isn't cruel. It's administrative. She vanishes before the wiper can clear her from their sight and the car fills with the sound of their own breathing. They drive without speaking, because any word right now would choose a side, and when they reach the station the captain is waiting in the lobby with a coffee that has already decided to be cold. He thanks them for their service in a voice carved from ice and suggests a week off, mandatory, for rest, for clarity, for the department's good name. Rowan hears the lock turn without seeing his hand and understands that the week off is not rest, it is quarantine. The date on the ledger glows in the calendar like a fever and they spend the days before it inventing new ways to be cautious. Hale checks the car for trackers and finds 2, removes 1, and leaves the other because sometimes you learn more by being seen. Rowan buys 3 cheap phones and teaches them to die on command. They stash copies of what little they still have with people who owe them quiet favors, a paramedic who hates bullies, a librarian who files memories like books, and a boy at the radio station who can record without the red light. They build a small machine out of trust and paranoia and pray the gears don't grind. At night the town rehearses normal, porch lights, TV shows, the sound of forks, but under it is the second score, low and steady, meetings that end too early, laughter that stops too fast, a van that idles 2 blocks from Rowan's apartment with its lights off until 3 in the morning and then glides away like a promise. Hale wakes once to find a folded program from a civic banquet on his kitchen table though he has never attended a banquet in his life. Inside the program a ribbon, white and clean, printed with words that read like a mission statement and taste like a threat, we cut so others won't bleed. The day arrives the way storms do, slowly and then all at once. It's Founders Night, the annual choreography of speeches and fireworks and pride stitched into bunting. The whole town becomes a stage with no wings to hide in, and the red circle on their calendar tells them whatever the society intends will happen where applause is loudest because applause is a blindfold. The municipal hall hums with people who believe in the story of themselves, and tucked into that story are men and women who believe in a different ending. The half-faced speaker shakes hands and jokes for cameras, and behind his eyes the lines are already drawn. Hale and Rowan are ghosts in the crowd, no badges, no backup, listening for the one note that doesn't belong. They hear it behind the boiler room, a hiss that is not steam, a language of valves turned the wrong way. Rowan follows the sound to a hatch with a padlock she could pick in sleep. Inside a corridor of pipes and a whisper of chlorine where chlorine should never be. She sends Hale a look that says worst case and he nods because words would spill. The society isn't planning a single headline, it's planning a policy. a scare big enough to hand them the keys to the town under the doctrine of necessity, an event with no bodies but enough coughing to publish a new rule, and above them on the lawn children practice cheers while a man in a suit holds a hand on his heart and a woman in a robe sharpens a sentence that will become a curfew. Rowan traces the piping with her hands, feeling the cold bite of metal, finding the unauthorized T-connection that snakes toward the ventilation intake under the stage, an elegant cruelty. Disperse a harmless but harrowing irritant, flood the field with panic, let the society arrive as shepherds with masks and clipboards, heroes with a mailing list. Hale texts the paramedic and the radio kid and the librarian 3 words, plan is air, and gets 3 replies that mean we are with you, and then a 4th reply that means we are not alone. A number they don't recognize sends a single pin dropped on a map, water plant, now. They split because splitting is what hunted animals do when they want at least one to breed again. Hale stays and turns valves with hands that remember baseball. Rowan takes a city bike with a chain that complains and rides through streets that remember hooves. The water plant waits beyond the train tracks like a lung. The gate is locked, the fence topped with the kind of wire that keeps good people out. Inside the plant a single light burns the color of old teeth. She climbs because climbing is what she's always done, counting rungs, counting risks, and drops into the yard like a stone that knows where it belongs. Inside the control room the screens say everything is fine the way a liar says, trust me. A man in a utility jacket sits with his back to her. He doesn't turn when she enters because he expects her. You're early, he says, and when he does turn his face isn't familiar and somehow is, the kind of face built to pass through crowds. He taps a key and a second screen wakes to a schematic of the town's pressure network like a nervous system with too many hands. He explains it the way you explain a recipe to a guest, calm and patient, how a slight drop here and a slight spike there make citizens thirsty for guardianship. No one dies tonight, he says, that's the point, we're not villains, we're editors, and Rowan hears the pronoun we and catalogs it like loot. She tells him quietly to stand up and step away and he smiles the sad smile of a teacher watching a student confuse chapter with book. I can't, he says. There's a second control 30 miles away and one voice on a timer, and then he turns the monitor toward her and there is Hale on the screen, not live, recorded 10 minutes earlier through a lens in the boiler room, moving with deliberation, turning the right valve, stopping the worst of it. A message layered inside the message. They accounted for competence, they accounted for decency, and alongside that recording another window opens, an empty room with a chair and a rope and a microphone the size of a thumbnail. Contingencies, the man says, there are always contingencies. His hands never leave the desk, he lets his words do the pointing. The chair is for whoever needs reminding that we do not like improvisation. Rowan breathes until her hands remember who they belong to. She steps close enough to see the tremor he's trying to hide, the tremor that says they recruited him for his ability to calculate harm but forgot to remove the part of him that flinches at it. She asks where the second control is and he says nothing with his mouth and everything with his eyes. On the edge of the desk a photograph of a river with a cracked dam. A postcard souvenir from a plant upriver that was supposed to be decommissioned last year and never was because the budget regretted it. She pockets the postcard like a coordinate and kills the camera to Hale with the flip of a breaker. The man lets her. He even leans to block another lens. If you stop us tonight, he says, the town will call it luck, not labor. And there is no anger in him, only fatigue, like a faithful muscle finally admitting it does not want to lift anymore. Back at the municipal hall Hale is learning a different lesson, that undoing one wire doesn't undo a narrative. The speaker strides onto the stage exactly on schedule. The band plays 3 jubilant notes and the power dips as if the town took a breath too deep. The crowd turns as one animal. Phones rise like a field of black lilies. A fine aerosol that would have stung throats and eyes fails to hiss because Hale set the valves right, but the fear has already been cued. The speaker lifts a hand and says, stay calm, in the voice that makes people obedient, and in that moment 4 men with lanyards appear at Hale's shoulders with smiles that have too many teeth. Inspector, one says, deliberately wrong, come with us, and Hale smiles back because his hands are empty but his pockets are full. He palms the radio kid's transmitter and lets it run hot, streaming nothing but footsteps and badges and a hiss of fabric. Sometimes noise is evidence if you teach people how to listen. Rowan rides back toward town with the postcard burning a rectangle in her pocket. She calls the paramedic and tells him to position ambulances anyway because panic is worse when you don't see care. She calls the librarian and tells her to print the ledger pages from the copies they hid, to deliver them to 3 people who will read them aloud if asked. She She calls Hale and gets only the hum of a line that has learned how to lie. She doesn't panic. She tightens, the way a fist does before it writes its name on a door. The hall becomes a theater of almosts, a near disaster turned into a celebration of preparedness by the very people who tried to summon the disaster. The speaker thanks the unseen hands who averted a problem the town will never understand, and the applause is grateful because no one wants to hear how close the knife came to the skin. The captain of police shakes the speaker's hand on stage and looks into the cameras like a man who just found a wallet and plans to return it on the news. Hale is guided to a side room where coffee is waiting and dignity is optional. The walls here are thick, the kind used to keep sound from learning how to escape, and the woman from the mezzanine walks in last, no robe now, just a grey coat without a name tag. She sits without asking and sets a small recorder on the table between them. "Detective," she says, "you have a talent for being inconvenient," and Hale says, "So do you." And for a moment they grin like cousins at a funeral. She explains with the patience of someone selling insurance that tonight was proof of concept. The town needed to feel the edge of risk so it would accept the weight of oversight. "We don't want to rule," she says, "we want to veto." And Hale says, "That's the same thing if you use it on everything." She doesn't disagree. She changes the subject to legacy, to his file, to the places where his hero certificate is smudged and therefore vulnerable. She is offering him a seat far from the chair with the rope, a future where his name survives even if the town forgets his face. And while she makes that offer, a screen in the corner wakes on its own to show Rowan entering the hall with rain on her hair, the live feed from a camera no one admits exists. The woman glances up and says, almost fondly, "She's relentless," and Hale says, "Yes." And then the door behind him opens and two men who introduce themselves as internal step inside with papers that look like warrants and feel like leashes. "We need your weapon," they say, "and your badge." And Hale realizes this conversation had two outcomes and both end with him lighter. Rowan reaches the stage just as the speaker finishes the third version of the same sentence. She watches his mouth shape the word safety and thinks about the man at the water plant who could not stop his hands from shaking. She lifts her phone and the radio kid pushes her feed live, not to the station but to every screen in the square, a trick the kid learned from watching concerts and uprisings. She speaks in a voice that belongs to teachers and judges and the person you want to believe. She says, "Tonight was staged," and the square turns its head, not by foreign hands or chance, but by people in this crowd who wanted your fear. And the sound that follows is not applause, it's that intake of breath that has not yet decided whether it will be a shout or a prayer. Security moves like a muscle around a heart and the speaker raises both hands. "Let her talk," he says, which is a brilliant play because it grants her legitimacy while he prepares the knife. Rowan continues. She names the valves, the corridor, the unauthorized T-connection. She does not name the man at the plant because sometimes mercy is also a weapon. She lifts the ledger pages the librarian printed and the camera tries not to read them but fails. Text bleeds into pixels, dues, tasks, corrections, and a symbol that looks like a hook dragging a halo through mud, and for several seconds the square is a jury without instructions. Then the screens go black, not one, all, as if the town blinked too hard. The lights follow, the microphones pop like insects, the generators don't catch, the grid gives up its ghost, and the night reclaims its century. In the dark people sound like animals, confused and honest. Rowan keeps talking because voices carry farther at night. She tells them where to walk, where not to push, to take children by the hand. She becomes the thing the society pretends to be, and in the chaos someone takes her elbow and says her name softly, and she turns, expecting Hale, finding instead the woman in the grey coat, up close and unarmed except for the certainty in her eyes. "There is something you need to see," the woman says, "and if you don't see it, others will die who do not deserve to be lesson plans." Rowan hesitates long enough to remember every rule she ever made about not going where doors are held open for you by enemies. And then she breaks her own rule because sometimes the only way to map a maze is from inside it. They move through a service corridor that smells like wet paper, down a stair that wasn't on any blueprint Hale stole, into a room with a single table and a single box, the kind of box that makes you think of churches and mail bombs. The woman opens it with a key nested in a locket and reveals photographs stacked like cards, every face in the town that matters, not in compromising scenes, in ordinary ones, cutting cake, mowing lawns, crossing streets with children, and on the back of each photograph a date and a note, not blackmail, inventory. The society's true power is not secrets, it's schedules. They know who leaves home at 6 and who leaves a minute later, who double locks and who forgets, who pauses to pet a dog and who always chooses the other sidewalk. A whole town reduced to patterns that can be nudged. We do this, the woman says, because order fails without choreography, and Rowan's voice is a blade when she answers. You do this because control feels like love. When you've never had either, the woman doesn't flinch, she closes the box gently like putting a child to bed. Above them the crowd learns how to be a crowd in the dark without breaking. Sirens far away argue with frogs. Hale is led out of the side room into a van with seats that smell like plastic and patience. His hands are cuffed but his spine is not. The internal men tell him he is under suspension for interfering with an ongoing operation, and he asks which operation, and they say the one that kept you safe. And he says, I feel so safe. And then, because he has learned from Rowan, he starts talking. To fill the space with his voice, names, dates, valves, hook and halo, he says often enough that the driver finally says, what? And Hale smiles into the dark because ears betray their owners. In the service room Rowan asks a question that sounds simple and is not, who are you without the society? And the woman answers without thinking, which means the truth sneaks in. Hungry, she says, and then corrects herself, responsible, and Rowan says, same word, different dictionary, and the woman's radio crackles with a voice that Rowan recognizes as the half-face. Status, he asks, and she replies, escorting the detective out, and Rowan hears the verb that pretends to be a favor, and knows the trap is not sprung yet, which means she still has a move left. She lunges for the radio and manages only to press transmit as she says, clear and unafraid, the dam upriver is your second control, and whether that fact is right hardly matters because the town now has a direction, people will go, sirens will follow, and the society will have to decide which fire to put out first. The woman's expression does not change, she takes the radio back and clicks it off. Somewhere above them the generators finally gather themselves and the lights bloom with the embarrassed blush of technology caught sleeping. Rowan takes a step toward the door and the woman steps with her like a dance. If you leave now, the woman says, you will live long enough to watch us win, and if you stay, you might die today, which is a kind of victory I refuse to give you. And Rowan says, you don't get to choose my victory, and the woman nods as if grading a paper. Fair, she says, and then the lights fail again and footsteps approach like rain. Hale's van stops not at a station but at a warehouse, not the tin rib one, a new ribcage with better locks. They bring him to a chair that is not the chair but remembers it. A camera stares with the hunger of a small god and a microphone waits like a witness. The woman in grey is not here. The half-face is, less handsome under the fluorescence. He pulls a chair close enough that their knees might touch and says, you can help. And Hale thinks of all the times, help has been a synonym for obey. He leans in until the camera can see nothing but his eyes and says, we're just getting started. And the half-face smiles as if that were a love letter. Back beneath the hall the door opens on a gust of fresh police uniforms and boots that have never stepped anywhere without permission. The captain leads them, eyes soft, mouth hard. Detective Rowan, he says, you are under arrest for inciting panic, and she laughs because sometimes laughter is the only accurate instrument. I prevented panic, she says. I kept your town from choking on the smoke you helped light. And for a breath the room is a coin in the air. Two sides, no gravity, but the coin lands because coins must. The cuffs are cold. The woman in grey doesn't move to stop it. She only watches with the same expression she wore when she watched the crowd applaud a saved disaster. As they bring Rowan up into the light the town looks almost normal again in that way broken things do when you squint. She lifts her chin and sees the square filled with faces that are trying on a new emotion called doubt. Some wear it well, some throw it away. The radio kid pumps a fist in the air from a rooftop no one knows how he reached. The paramedic looks up from a child with a scraped knee and mouths, you did it. The librarian stands at the edge of the crowd holding a stack of papers like a shield, and the sirens that were headed for the hall begin to turn, one by one, upriver, to the dam that may or may not be real but is real enough to pull them, and the speaker's smile loses a millimeter of confidence which in his currency is a fortune. The van door closes on Hale and his camera and his quiet resolve. The cuffs click on Rowan and her story and her stubborn light. The town inhales, the river waits. The ledger pages still in the librarian's hands become heavier than paper, and the woman in grey tips her face to the sky as if listening for instructions that come from weather, from fate, from a boardroom with no windows. And the last thing you hear before the screen goes to black is the half-faced voice fed through speakers. Hidden in places you used to trust, partnerships are being formed as we speak, he says. The next correction will be unanimous, and then the power dies again, not a flicker this time but a surrender. The whole grid kneels, and in the dark a chorus of phones light up with the same message from an unknown number. 3 words, the same handwriting as before, ready for vote. Phones glow like fireflies in a jar and the message ready for vote crawls across the town like ivy. Living rooms, squad cars, choir lofts, the back booth at the diner, and for a heartbeat it looks like convenience wrapped in civic pride. Tap yes if you want safety, tap no if you want chaos, the kind of question that isn't a question at all. And while thumbs hover the speaker's voice pours from municipal speakers that aren't supposed to be able to speak without permission. Temporary emergency oversight, he says, measured, accountable, surgical, and the word surgical lands like a promise made with a glove on. Rowan is in the custody van tasting the metallic breath of the cage and thinking faster than the wheels can turn. The radio kid's transmitter still alive in her sleeve because she never surrenders all her pockets. Hale sits under fluorescent confession at the warehouse with the half-face asking him to define loyalty. The woman in grey watches the square from a shadow that fits her too well, upright and unafraid. And the river waits with the patience of old stone as the sirens already taste its name. Rowan asks the officer with the soft eyes and the hard mouth if she can make a call, gets no, smiles like a locksmith, and coughs hard enough to cover the sound of her sleeve transmitter clicking to wide open. Her voice leaves the van and swims up every wire the radio kid can steal. Don't vote yet, she says into the ordinary air. Ask where your yes will sleep when the night is over. She names nothing that can be slandered as conspiracy. She names valves and ledgers and a symbol shaped like a hook pulling a halo into the dirt. She tells them how fear tastes when it's been seasoned by someone else's hand, and around the town people hesitate just long enough for doubt to put on its shoes. The bartender silences a bar full of screens. The librarian pulls a stool into the doorway and reads the margins of the ledger like scripture. The paramedic parks an ambulance where children can see it and waves even though the night has teeth. Hale answers the half-face with silence because silence is a weapon when the other side wants footage of your anger. He watches the man's eyes for blink rhythms, for the microtells that betray hurry. He finds none and understands that the society practices stillness the way athletes practice breath. He shifts tactics, speaks of tapes and water and votes that arrive before questions, says the word damn like a key slipped into a lock to see if it fits, and the half-face doesn't flinch but the lights in the corner of the room do, a flicker, a heartbeat catching, and Hale smiles because buildings rat out their owners if you listen to their wiring. The door opens without sound and the woman in grey steps in with rain licking her coat. She sets a tablet on the table and the screen shows the river marked in red and the town mapped like a nervous system. A box in the corner reads contingency, public ratification. She doesn't look triumphant, she looks tired. You can't stop a vote with a monologue, she says, only with a better plan, and Hale says, then here's one, let's turn your contingency into a confession. The vote rolls through houses like a drumline. Thumbs begin to find yes because yes is easier than no when you're tired. Rowan's voice threads that wave with a story instead of a slogan. She describes the boiler room like a ghost tour, the unauthorized tea fitting like a thief in a tuxedo, the way panic can be aerosolized. She never says names because names are how they silence you. She says functions because functions are how you break machines. The officer driving the van hears her too, and somewhere in him a hinge shifts. He takes a slower route like a man who forgot his hat, and Rowan feels the change and knows small miracles still rent rooms in this town. The radio kid overlays Rowan's audio onto the emergency system at the high school stadium. The scoreboards become mouths, the bleachers listen, and the ready for vote prompt stutters once like a bird hitting glass. Upriver the dam that might be a rumor and might be a plan stands with its cracked smile. The sirens chasing rumor arrive to find gates chained and a night guard who has 2 hands and 1 good story. Maintenance, he says, shrugging like a man who understands that truth is a jacket you turn inside out when weather changes. The paramedic listens to his pulse and his words and does not decide yet which is lying. The librarian in the square holds up a sheet and points at a line that reads, Correction 17B, infrastructure sympathy, and the crowd doesn't know what sympathy means in a ledger until she translates. Scare the town with a near miss so they will sign away the power to say no next time. The bartender pours water for everyone and says, on the house, and it is the kind of line that makes people laugh and then think. The half-face leans closer to Hale as if to impart a blessing. We give them a safe story to live inside, he says. Do you know what chaos does to decent people? And Hale thinks of Rowan's apartment, the van that idled outside, the captain's coffee that went cold before the truth could warm it. He thinks of his own hands turning a valve in the dark and of a different life where that would have been the whole job. He says, decent people survive chaos without you if you let them practice, and the woman in grey watches their words like a dealer reading a table. She touches the tablet and the vote counter ticks up, percentages shift like tides. The yes gains a field goal's worth of ground and the half-face smiles in relief so small it could be a blink. Rowan decides cages are only walls if you let them be definitions. She braces her shoes on the metal floor and throws her shoulder into the van's back door, not to break it but to bruise it. The officer curses and brakes and looks back, and in that glance Rowan sees a father who keeps a school photo in his wallet and remembers that all oaths are made by people who wanted to be good. Listen, she says, you don't have to unlock me. Just let me stand where people can see my face. And he says nothing with his mouth and everything with his hands as he parks the van beside the square and steps away to speak to someone who isn't there. Rowan shifts to the tiny window. The radio kid drags her feed onto the civic screens again like a magician palming a coin. Ask yourselves who counts the votes, she says. And that lands like a match on dry grass because the town has a history with counted things that vanish between hands. The society anticipated doubt. They planned a demonstration that would cement their benevolence. Controlled burst of peppered air in one corner of the square. Quick deployment of their masked volunteers. Free water, clean towels, calm voices. But Hale turned the wrong valve into the right one, and now the choreography has music with no dancers. The woman in grey adapts fast. Plan C, she says into a channel only the obedient hear. Visibility protocol, and men and women in grey coats fan out to hand blankets and smile and say we're here, we heard, we care. The half-face returns to the balcony and performs the role of reluctant leader. The town watches the stage and the screens and their phones as if waiting for the end of a juggling act to discover which ball was the real one. The river hears the sirens and does not care. Water keeps its own books, but up on the dam a chain gives under bolt cutters that did not exist 5 minutes ago. The paramedic follows the noise because running toward trouble is the only religion he never lost. Inside the gate a single panel glows and a single keypad waits for a code someone will guess correctly if they have touched enough of the town's doors. The librarian arrives breathless with a memory of the ledger margins, numbers that looked like dates and were not. She types them and the panel's light changes from calm to considering. Upriver a sluice shudders, not opening, not closing, thinking, because machines think in their way and their way is whether they can bear the load without cracking their old bones. The applause from the square, hundreds of yards and a lifetime away, drifts thin as a rumor. Hale tests his cuffs against the chair and the chair answers with a whine that means it has been asked this question before. The half-face tilts his head and says, you still think this is about us? And Hale replies, it's always been about the people you count on to nod. And as if the town heard him, the vote counter on the woman's tablet pauses. The yes stranded on a narrow ledge, the no climbing with scraped knees. Rowan's sleeve transmitter starts to heat because the radio kid is pulling power he doesn't have. The captain stands in the wings of the stage pretending he isn't calculating next sentences like escape routes. The woman in grey's radio whispers in a tone that would make other people pray. Upriver has interference, and for the first time she looks genuinely worried. She doesn't glance at the half-face. She looks at Hale, as if suspecting he's planted a seed he never touched. What did you do? She asks, and Hale says, we told a story you can't edit. She taps the tablet again and new windows open, traffic cams, utility logs, a flickering live feed of the damn road, 3 figures bent over a panel. One of them the paramedic, one the librarian, the third a night guard wrestling with his own conscience like a coat that doesn't fit anymore, and the woman in grey exhales a string of numbers nobody else in the room understands, and somewhere men with keys begin to move like blood to a wound. In the square the speaker raises his hands to ask for quiet and receives it because quiet is currency in a crisis and he always pays exact change. This vote is your voice, he says. No coercion, no trick. And as if the town were a single creature it turns to look at the van where Rowan's face floats in a tiny rectangle behind wired glass. She says, if there were no trick they wouldn't have to rush, and time obliges her by rushing. The countdown on the vote pulses faster like a heartbeat climbing stairs. Ready for vote becomes cast now, and some phones cast without permission because someone taught them obedience and forgot to teach them doubt. The numbers surge and freeze and surge again. The half-face smiles like a dealer pushing chips to a player who can't afford them. The woman in grey murmurs, just a little more. Upriver the panel accepts a code that was never supposed to be guessed, and doors inside the dam clank the way old throats clear before a speech. The paramedic calls Rowan on a line that shouldn't cross that distance and says, "We might be about to make a mess or save a town or both," and Rowan laughs with the joy of people who choose, "Do the thing that keeps kids above water." She says, "We'll handle the rest." The librarian pulls a lever with her whole small body and the sluice shifts, diverting pressure away from a crack you could fit your hand into. Alarms complain like bureaucrats forced to work. The night guard wipes his eyes with dirty knuckles and says he never signed up to be a villain. The sirens finally arrive late to their own party and choose not to arrest anyone because sometimes competence wears a volunteer's jacket. The woman in grey watches the feed from the dam and turns her tablet off. She looks at Hale as if measuring his coffin. "You've ruined something that was going to be clean," she says, and Hale answers, "It was never clean. It was only quiet." She nods like a teacher awarding partial credit and stands. "We pivot," she tells the half-face, and he nods as if she is the only person who ever tells him the truth. In the square the vote hits a threshold that was predetermined in a room with better coffee than this and confetti cannons poised in trunks that will not open because tonight isn't a celebration, it's a reveal. The screens flash tally processing and stay there like a stuck elevator. The crowd murmurs. The bartender says, "Hold." The librarian texts the radio kid a single word, "Now." And the radio kid releases what he has been nursing in the wires like a secret, composite feed of the boiler room. The ledger margins, the water plant schematic, the dam feed, the map with pins in places that aren't bodies but bottlenecks, the hook dragging the halo in the corner of every page, and over it he pastes the speaker's voice from the warehouse, "We correct what cannot be corrected by law," and the square inhales as one. The captain looks at the speaker and sees a future that is suddenly more expensive. He lifts a hand toward officers who are waiting to move. The woman in grey steps from her shadow and for the first time puts herself fully in the light. Her face calm, her posture the posture of someone who has never loved applause and never needed it. She says into no microphone and every ear, "We can walk out of here and keep this town from becoming a training ground for worse men, and it is the closest thing to a plea she will allow herself." Rowan in the van meets her eyes across the noise and sees not a monster but a zealot who thinks the difference matters. All at once the grid returns like a body that decided not to die. The screens blink honest for one unguarded second, and in that second the vote tally appears with numbers that will be argued about in kitchens for years. 49% yes, 49% no, 2% withheld pending verification, a limbo that tastes like rain on iron. The half-face opens his mouth to call victory anyway because spin is also a machine. And the square, weary and wired, does something new. It doesn't boo and it doesn't cheer, it waits, and waiting is the one move the society never gained out because it likes rushes, it likes deadlines, it likes panic buying power. A pop from the edge of the square cracks the pause, too sharp for a generator, too small for a gun, the kind of sound an old transformer makes when it remembers age, and the lights stutter, the speakers cough, and every phone goes black in the same breath. Not a glitch, an intention. Somewhere a breaker was pulled by a hand that isn't on any of their maps. Hale feels the warehouse hum drain and realizes they are not the only players at this table. Rowan feels the van shiver and knows the board just tilted. The woman in grey's radio dies mid-syllable and she does not swear because swearing would be admitting surprise. The square sits in true dark without a single manufactured star, the only light the glow of the river bending around the town like an arm. Footsteps move with purpose from the courthouse side street, too many for comfort, too synchronized to be an accident. A new voice rises, amplified by something battery-fed and patient. It says, "The vote is concluded." And it is not the half-face, and it is not the captain, and it is not the woman in grey. It is a third voice we have not heard and already no we will not like. It continues, "Authority transfers at dawn." And the crowd turns as a single animal toward the sound, and we cut to black on the shape of boots and badges that don't belong to this town, and a sigil stenciled on a case that is not hook and halo but something older, a compass and a blindfold, and Hale whispers into a dead mic, "They weren't the top of the ladder." And Rowan laughs once in the dark because even fear can admire a plot twist, and the last thing we keep before the silence closes is the woman in grey saying, "Not to anyone and to everyone, you're not ready for them," as the river deepens its voice and the clock on the church that never stops decides to skip a beat.